Democrats are at a crossroads right now, still reeling from a brutal election loss and trying to figure out how to navigate a political landscape that's increasingly shaped by Trump's influence. On one side, you've got some trying to soften their approach, maybe even embrace parts of Trump's agenda to broaden their appeal. On the other, you've got the hardliners who are digging in, opposing anything and everything tied to Trump. Well, the problem? Neither side seems to have a clear, cohesive vision. Instead of focusing on the future and connecting with voters, they're stuck reacting to the moment and to each other. You see, this moment calls for strong leadership and a reality check, but Democrats seem to be missing the mark. Strategists are pointing fingers at media bias and messaging issues, but those excuses don't get to the heart of the problem. The party has struggled to adapt, to listen, and to deliver something voters can't believe in. For all their talk about progress and values, there's a real disconnect between what they say and what people actually feel. It's hard not to wonder if they've lost sight of what really matters. And there's no greater example of just how disconnected the left is than Ariana Grande's Wicked press tour, a bizarre, almost surreal snapshot of this cultural moment. Her overly rehearsed delivery and disconnected platitudes about love and inclusivity have left many scratching their heads. It's well-meaning, sure, but it feels hollow, just like a lot of the broader conversation happening right now. So let's check out one of her clips and unpack what's going on.
Not to be corny, but make the world a safer place, especially right now, you know? I think it's the most important work that we can do is learn how we can listen and be there for each other and the people that we love. And especially the most beautiful community in the entire world. And I love my queer brothers and sisters so much, more than anything.
We love you back.
We do.
I want to throw a theory or an idea out there. Fierro, okay? His musical number I love so much because the girls in town love him, but also the boys do, Bo and Yang. Do we think that maybe Fierro likes the attention from both? I don't know.
Of course. Well, Oz is a very queer place and has always been.
Yeah.
Even from the L. Frank Baum books, it's always been queer.
Yeah. I think so, for sure.
Gay.
Hey, we'll take it.
Ariana Grande's comments on the Wicked press tour might sound sweet on the surface, but when you dig a little deeper, they feel more like pandering than anything meaningful. Her claim that Oz has always been queer is simply not true. L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, wrote a children's story about courage, self-discovery, and friendship, not a coded LGBTQ plus NBC narrative. Sure, over time, some people have interpreted Wicked as a metaphor for being an outsider, which can resonate with queer experiences, but that doesn't mean Oz was always meant to be a gay place. Grande's claim feels like she's reaching to connect with a specific audience, but it doesn't line up with the actual history of the story. This is where it starts to feel more like pandering. By saying things like, I love my queer brothers and sisters more than anything, Grande is playing directly to her audience and the entertainment industry's progressive leanings. But what does that actually do for the LGBTQ NPC plus community? Nothing. It's identity politics at its most shallow, leveraging a social movement to make herself look good. It's not about action or meaningful advocacy. It's about polishing her image and getting applause. And then there's her language. Vague, feel-good platitudes like make the world a safer place or it's the most important work we can do. Sure, it sounds nice, but it doesn't mean anything. These kinds of statements are classic emotional appeals, designed to tug at the heartstrings without offering anything concrete. Her random theory about Fierro liking attention from both genders, it's speculative at best and adds nothing of value to the discussion. Now, this isn't really surprising for anybody who's been following Hollywood for the last decade. The industry has leaned heavily into left-leaning narratives that it's hard to tell where entertainment ends and political messaging begins. Celebrities like Grande seem more focused on aligning with progressive buzzwords than actually contributing to the conversations they're jumping into. It's performative and it benefits their brand more than anyone else. Grande's comments feel more like empty posturing than anything sincere. If she really wants to make the world a safer, better place, she might consider focusing less on applause lines and more on actually engaging with these issues in a thoughtful way. Anyway, if you thought that clip was awkward, well, just wait. The next one takes cringe to a whole new level.
I'm a person, and I feel, and I have feelings, and I can share them.
And if you need to cry right now, you cry.
Yeah. And someone said to me once that the green was the thing that I would love the most about Alphabet, that I would want to stay green. But actually, being green, yes, I loved playing this character. But every time I took the makeup off, I loved who I was even more. So I've come away feeling really beautiful.
You f***ing are.
Yeah.
Holy shit. You know?
What you've brought to this film and to these characters, you've not just taken care of them, you have transformed them for good. Really, really, you have.
This is also my first time ever doing a
You have
amazing.
been the light of the day. You are
truly-
such a gift.
You brought such light into the room. Thank you very much.
We appreciate
for coming into
you.
this room today. We needed to come in.
This moment between Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, supposedly heartfelt and emotional, feels more like an overacted performance than genuine sincerity. Erivo's reflection on being green as a profound personal journey might sound meaningful in a vacuum, but let's be honest. Most people are too busy paying rent, buying groceries, and juggling real-world stress to care about how an actor felt about green makeup. The attempt to elevate something so trivial into a deeply resonant moment shows just how disconnected this type of Hollywood performance is from everyday struggles. Then there's Ariana Grande's attempt to say, turn off the cameras, which rings completely hollow. It's as if she's signaling to the audience that what follows is too raw, too real. But of course, the cameras stay on and the charade continues. This performative vulnerability feels orchestrated, a deliberate attempt to come across as relatable and deep. But instead of connecting, it alienates because it's so obviously contrived. The scene takes another turn when the interviewer mentions it's their first junket. Both actresses lean forward in perfect unison, reflexively showering the interviewer with compliments. While the interviewer probably does deserve some acknowledgement, the synchronized, almost rehearsed response strips the moment of any authenticity whatsoever. Their supportive words feel less like genuine encouragement and more like a calculated move to appear warm and nurturing. It's a textbook example of groupthink, mindless positivity devoid of true individuality or thought. Rhetorically, this moment relies heavily on emotional appeal, designed to make the audience feel warmth and admiration rather than engage with anything substantial. There's also a glaring logical fallacy here. The implication that the emotional weight of Erivo's personal connection to green makeup somehow equates to transformative art or cultural significance. It doesn't. It's just makeup. Turning it into a life-altering epiphany is a stretch that feels almost insulting when compared to the real challenges people face daily. So what we see here is essentially an act, one carefully crafted to project vulnerability and camaraderie. The problem isn't just that it feels fake. It's that this kind of performance trivializes the very idea of authenticity. Now, speaking of actors having over-the-top displays of emotion, Sharon Stone recently had words.
You know, Italy has seen fascism. Italy has seen these things. You guys, you understand what happens. You have seen this before. My country is in its adolescence. Adolescence is very arrogant. Adolescence thinks it knows everything. Adolescence is naive and ignorant and arrogant. And we are in our ignorant, arrogant adolescence. We haven't seen this before in our country. So Americans who don't travel, who 80% don't have a passport, who are uneducated, are in their extraordinary naivete.
Sharon Stone's comments, while likely intended as a critique of perceived flaws in American society, fall into the trap of hyperbole and false equivalencies that undermine their validity. Comparing the United States to Italy, especially in the context of fascism, is not only misleading but reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of both American history and its political system. Fascism, as experienced in Italy under Mussolini, involved authoritarian rule, suppression of opposition, and the absence of the democratic process. To equate America's democratic system with its robust checks and balances to a country that succumbed to dictatorship shows a lack of nuance and ignores key differences in governance and cultural history. Her characterization of America as being in its arrogant adolescence is similarly flawed. This metaphor, while colorful, disregards the reality that the United States was founded by individuals who had deep knowledge of the other systems of governance. Many of the founding fathers lived under monarchies or studied historical democracies and used that understanding to craft a system designed to endure. The American Republic, with its balance of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, has proven to be one of the most stable democracies in history. It has fostered unprecedented innovation and prosperity through free market capitalism and a system of governance that, while imperfect, has endured and adapted for over 2 centuries. Furthermore, her rhetoric about Americans being uneducated or naive because 80% lack passports is both condescending and irrelevant. Cultural habits like traveling abroad do not define the success or failure failure of a governance system. The implication that Americans' lack of international experience somehow makes them incapable of understanding their political environment overlooks the fact that governance is shaped not just by exposure to other systems, but also by domestic values, traditions, and innovations. American democracy has thrived precisely because it has adapted to its unique cultural context, not because it mirrors European systems. Calling any aspect of American democracy fascist demonstrates a misunderstanding of how the republic operates. Fascism requires a consolidation of power in a single leader or party with little to no opposition. In contrast, the U.S. has built-in mechanisms to prevent such a scenario. Elections, an independent judiciary, and a free press all ensure accountability. The very fact that power transitions peacefully, as evidenced by Trump's departure from office and the continued functioning of institutions despite political polarization, undermines any claim of creeping fascism. Ultimately, Stone's comments come across as anti-American rhetoric rather than constructive criticism. Her tone is patronizing, painting the entire nation as naive and arrogant without acknowledging its enduring strengths or a capacity for self-correction. Critiquing the flaws in American governance is valid and necessary, but reducing it to simplistic metaphors and false parallels does nothing to advance the conversation. Instead, it dismisses the complexity of American democracy and the ingenuity of its people, who have continuously proven their ability to adapt and thrive.
What I can say is that the only way that we can help with these issues is to help each other. Now, we can't just say that women should help women, because that's the only way we have survived so far. We must say that good men must help good men, and those good men must be very aware that a lot of your friends are not good men. And you can't continue to pretend that your friends are good men when they are not good men. And you must be very clear-minded and understand that your friends who are not good men are dangerous, violent men. And you have to keep them away from your daughters, your wives, and your girlfriends. Because this is a time when we can no longer look away when bad men are bad.
Sharon Stone's comments are problematic, not because they attempt to address serious societal issues, but because they do so in a divisive and oversimplified way. Her speech demonizes men as a monolithic group, drawing sweeping generalizations that undermine the nuance and complexities required to address gender dynamics meaningfully. By framing bad men as a looming threat and placing the sole responsibility for combating them on good men, she creates a false dichotomy that polarizes rather than unite. One glaring issue in our argument is a complete absence of criticism or accountability towards women. Her rhetoric paints women as infallible victims or passive observers who need to be shielded by the actions of good men. This not only absolves women of any responsibility, but also reduces them to a secondary role in societal improvement. It also promotes a subtle form of misandry, implying that men are inherently flawed or dangerous unless proven otherwise. Such an approach alienates a significant portion of our audience and perpetuates gender stereotypes rather than challenging them. The speech leans heavily on emotional appeal, using phrases like dangerous and violent men and invoking the image of protecting daughters, wives, and girlfriends. This taps into fear and defensiveness, aiming to elicit an emotional reaction rather than fostering rational discussion. While emotion has its place in advocacy, here it feels manipulative, drawing on worst-case scenarios to push a narrative that oversimplifies complex societal issues. Her language is inflammatory and designed to divide, rather than encourage collective accountability and progress. The generalization that many men's friends are not good men relies on anecdotal evidence and assumptions rather than facts. The suggestion that good men are responsible for policing other men is reductive, ignoring structural and societal factors that contribute to harmful behaviors. This creates a straw man argument, framing all men as either complicit or responsible for the actions of others, while conveniently ignoring systemic issues or the role of women in cultural change. Additionally, the speech's framing places the onus entirely on men to act, implying that women have no agency in addressing societal problems. This exclusionary perspective fails to recognize that lasting solutions require collaboration and accountability from all genders. It also perpetuates the idea that a woman's role is limited to being protected, which contradicts the progress towards equality that Stone presumably supports. Overall, Sharon Stone's speech, while likely well-intended, is divisive and counterproductive. Its reliance on emotional manipulation, sweeping generalizations, and a false dichotomy between good and bad men undermines its credibility. By framing men as a sole problem and solution, she ignores the complexity of societal issues and alienates the very people whose support she seeks to inspire. A more balanced, inclusive approach would foster unity and shared responsibility, rather than perpetuating stereotypes and division. Anyway, on to more coping and seething, this time from Kamala Harris's campaign, who's still struggling to understand exactly why she lost.
I would say, I mean, look, I am not media hater by any measure, and I think that, we women don't get far in life talking about double standards, so that's not the point. But I do think a narrative 107 days, 2 weeks fucked up because of a hurricane, 2 weeks talking about how she didn't do interviews, which, she was doing plenty, but we were doing in our own way. We had to, be the nominee, had to find a running mate and do a rollout. I mean, there was all these things that you kind of want to factor in, but real people heard in some way that we were not going to have interviews, which was both not true and also so counter to any kind of standard that was put on Trump that I think that was a problem. And then on top of that, we would do an interview, and to Stephanie's point, the questions were small and processy and about
dumb.
They were not informing a voter who was trying to listen to learn more or to understand. And I'm not here to say that the whole system was focused on us incorrectly. I'm just saying, again, of the things we need to explore as we move forward as a campaign and as a country, that does a disservice to voters. And, I think back and think we should have signaled more of our strategy early on about podcasts and who we were trying to reach. But we had a limited amount of time to reach the people we were trying to reach, and we were trying to go to them. But being up against a narrative that we weren't doing anything or we were afraid to have interviews is completely bullshit, and also took hold a little bit. And we just gave us another thing we had to fight back for that Trump never had to worry about.
This Kamala Harris operative's attempt to frame her campaign struggles as primarily a result of gender biases and limited time fails to hold up under scrutiny. It's overly simplistic and deflective to suggest this was the defining issue of her campaign. Harris had ample opportunity to define herself and present a vision of voters, yet consistently failed to do so in a meaningful way. The claim that the campaign's 107-day timeline was a major obstacle ignores the fact that Kamala Harris has been vice president for over 3.5 years, during which she had countless opportunities to connect with voters and solidify her public image. Additionally, she ran for president in the Democrat 2020 primaries, giving America a significant chance to get to know her. This wasn't someone stepping out of obscurity. Harris was a known figure who failed to resonate because her campaign leaned almost exclusively on anti-Trump rhetoric. Beyond the vague promise of being the antithesis of Trump, she offered little to no substance. Even attempts to weaponize an October surprise, such as unverified claims about Trump's alleged compliments to Nazis, came across as hearsay and desperation rather than a meaningful critique on his policies or character. Moreover, the campaign's unwillingness to address the challenges of the Biden administration or acknowledge its missteps damaged Harris's credibility. Her refusal to distinguish herself from Biden's shortcomings, including public concerns about his cognitive abilities, made her appear complicit in perpetuating narratives many voters found dishonest. Rather than owning these issues or presenting actionable policies to fix them, Harris relied on vague platitudes and virtue signaling, which eroded trust among voters. This left many, including myself, feeling that Harris was more focused on deflecting blame than on offering solutions. Taking this a step further, the operative's arguments are riddled with logical fallacies, particularly ad hominem attacks and strawman arguments. By contrasting Harris's treatment with Trump's, they imply that Trump faced no unfair narratives or criticisms, which is patently false. I mean, the man was shot in the ear, for God's sake. Trump's campaign endured a relentless scrutiny and criticism, much of it centered on his policies and personal behavior. To suggest that Harris faced unique challenges while dismissing her failure to engage voters on substantive issues is a disingenuous attempt to rewrite the story of her campaign struggles. The operative leans heavily on emotional appeal, suggesting Harris was unfairly judged because of her gender. This tactic aims to deflect legitimate criticism of her campaign's shortcomings by framing them as systemic injustice. While systemic issues certainly exist, it's manipulative to use them as a blanket excuse for a candidate who struggled to articulate a clear vision vision or connect with voters. Ultimately, the Harris campaign faltered not because of external narratives or time constraints, but because it failed to present real policies and address the legitimate concerns of voters. Blaming the media, gender biases, or a lack of time obscures a deeper issue: Harris's inability to establish trust or demonstrate leadership. If the campaign wants to learn from these failures, it needs to focus less on external scapegoats and more on presenting a candidate with substance, accountability, and a vision voters can believe in. And speaking of the campaign, we have Tampon Tim coming in.
Every place we went, the caring and the sense of joy. I know it's incredibly disappointing now, and look, candidly, it's a bit scary because there's a very different vision that's being put out there.
Tim's comment that Trump's vision is a bit scary is a textbook example of dishonest framing. By broadly labeling Trump's policies as frightening without addressing their substance, Walz leans entirely on emotional appeal rather than engaging with the actual proposals. What exactly is scary about prioritizing American workers, securing borders, or disengaging from endless foreign wars? These are policies aimed at protecting and improving the lives of Americans, a vision that resonates with many because it focuses on tangible outcomes rather than abstract ideals. All that being said, let's break down some of Trump's key proposals. First, his commitment to putting American workers first includes securing trade deals that protect American manufacturing and incentivizing companies to keep jobs in the United States. These are not extreme ideas. They are common sense measures to ensure economic stability and growth. Second, his plan to reduce foreign entanglements reflects a long overdue shift towards prioritizing domestic issues over costly overseas interventions. These policies aim to strengthen the U.S. economy and preserve American lives, yet Walz dismisses them with vague fear-mongering. Trump's immigration policies, including deporting illegal immigrants with criminal records and securing the border, are also widely supported by many Americans who view national security and law enforcement as priorities. These measures are not anti-immigrant. They focus on ensuring public safety and the integrity of the legal immigration system. Similarly, Trump's emphasis on financial policies to protect American-made products addresses long-standing economic concerns about unfair trade practices and globalization's impact on domestic industries. Walz's framing of these policies as scary is both disingenuous and lazy. Rather than engaging with the specifics, he relies on the broad generalization that paints Trump's vision as inherently threatening without explaining why. This approach not only misrepresents Trump's policies, but also denies voters the opportunity to have a meaningful discussion about their merits or shortcomings. By refusing to engage in a substantive critique, Walz forfeits the chance to present a compelling alternative vision because, in fact, as we've seen from his and Harris's campaign, he doesn't have one. Walz's statement leans heavily on appeal to fear, a classic logical fallacy designed to provoke an emotional reaction rather than offer evidence-based reasoning. The vagueness of his language is another key issue. Phrases like a very different vision are broad and non-specific, leaving listeners to fill in the gaps with their own anxieties. This lack of clarity makes it impossible to evaluate the validity of his concerns, while conveniently sidestepping the need for concrete arguments. Walz's reliance on emotional appeal without addressing the specific of Trump's policies reveals a strategic decision to vilify rather than debate. This rhetorical tactic may rally those already opposed to Trump, but it fails to offer meaningful insight or a constructive alternative for voters seeking real solutions. Walz's statement is an example of shallow political rhetoric that prioritizes sound bites over substance. If he truly finds Trump's vision scary, he owes voters a clear explanation of why and what he should propose instead. Without that, his comments come across as nothing more than partisan fear-mongering. And speaking of Tampon Tim, his former running mate, Kamala Harris, also released a statement, and this is what she had to say.
I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
Kamala Harris's statement is a masterclass in vague, emotionally charged rhetoric that lacks substance and relies heavily on covert manipulation. By using phrases like "don't ever let anybody take your power away from you," Harris implies an imminent threat to her audience's rights or freedoms, despite providing no evidence of such threat. This kind of language is designed to stoke fear and urgency among her supporters without pointing to any concrete policies or actions that would justify it. The implication that someone is poised to take your power is inherently misleading. Trump has already served as president, and during his term, no rights were taken away from anyone. Claims to the contrary, such as framing the overturning of Roe v. Wade as a Trump abortion ban, are demonstrably false. Trump appointed a Supreme Court justice, but the decision to overturn Roe rested on the judiciary, which operates independently of the executive branch, a hallmark of the checks and balances of America's republic. Moreover, the ruling did not ban abortion, it returned the issue to the states. Several states, including traditionally Republican ones like Montana and Alaska, have since passed pretty liberal abortion policies. Even in this highly contentious issue, no fundamental rights were erased. Control simply shifted to a more localized level. A position that was also supported by very liberal former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Harris's use of platitudes such as "you have the same power you did before" and "don't let anybody take your power" is emblematic of political doublespeak. These statements sound empowering but are so broad and devoid of specificity that they offer no actionable insight. Instead, they act as a covert emotional appeal, subtly suggesting that voters are under threat without explaining how or why. This tactic is manipulative, preying on fears and anxieties while avoiding accountability for backing up her claims with evidence. The statement relies on appeal to fear, a logical fallacy where the speaker invokes vague dangers to persuade the audience. The lack of specificity in what power or circumstance refers to further compounds the problem, creating a straw man that is impossible to refute because it doesn't point to any real or identifiable threat. This kind of rhetoric is designed to rally support through emotional resonance rather than intellectual engagement, which is disingenuous in a democratic system where voters deserve transparency. Moreover, this framing dismisses the robustness of America's system of checks and balances, which prevents any one branch or individual from unilaterally eroding fundamental rights. Even if one were to accept the premise that Trump or any leader posed a hypothetical threat to rights, the American political system has mechanisms in place to prevent such overreach. This was evident during Trump's first term, where his administration faced significant pushback on numerous initiatives, demonstrating the strength of institutional safeguards. In reality, Harris's statement doesn't address any specific policy or challenge. Instead, it weaponizes vagueness and fear to manipulate her audience into believing they are at risk, despite no evidence to support such a claim. This approach not only undermines trust in political discourse, but also distracts from meaningful conversations about actual policy. If Harris wants to inspire and engage voters, she would do better by focusing on presenting concrete ideas and addressing real issues rather than leaning on baseless, emotionally charged rhetoric. Now, while Democrats are having a legitimate reputational crisis, some on that party, like James Carville, knows exactly what's up, and he's been spitting.
And let me tell you another huge error, huge fucking error this is when people said campaigns need to reflect progressive values. No, they don't. No, they don't. Campaigns are authoritarian by their nature. And if I were running a 2028 campaign and I had some little snot-nosed 23-year-old saying, "I'm going to resign if you don't do this," not only would I fire that motherfucker on the spot, I would find out who hired them and fire that person on the spot. I'm really not interested in your uninformed, stupid, jackass opinion as to whether you go on Joe Rogan or not. And there were people that worked in the White House that were protesting because they didn't like the president's policy in Gaza. Well, then get the fuck out of the White House.
James Carville's candid critique of the Democrat Party is a rare and much-needed dose of reality in a party often bogged down by overly cautious messaging and pandering to the latest cultural trends. Even during the campaign, Carville was one of the few voices within the party willing to call out its flaws. His blunt style may ruffle feathers, but it's precisely the kind of honesty and authenticity the Democrats desperately need if they hope to connect with voters in a meaningful way. Carville, along with figures like Bill Clinton and Brian Williams, represents a shrinking faction within the Democrat Party that prioritizes pragmatism and effective governance over ideological purity. His acknowledgement that campaigns are inherently authoritarian in structure, not spaces for endless debate over progressive values, shows a clear understanding of how to get things done. The party's reluctance to embrace this realism, instead pandering to niche interests or indulging in performative wokeness, has alienated many Americans who are looking for concrete solutions to their problems, not lip service. What makes Carville's tone so refreshing is its unvarnished authenticity. He's not afraid to point out when the party is failing, whether it's allowing inexperienced staffers to dictate policy priorities or indulging in internal protests that detract from the work at hand. The directness contrasts sharply with the overly crafted image Kamala Harris projected during her campaign, a style that voters overwhelmingly rejected. Americans, particularly in this era of political polarization, are craving leaders who are real, flawed, and unapologetically themselves. It's what won Trump the election in 2016, in 2024, and it's what Democrats are sorely lacking now. Carville's focus on calling out internal dysfunction and rejecting hollow narratives about progress is the blueprint for how Democrats can regain credibility. His no-nonsense approach highlights the importance of producing policies that matter to Americans, policies that protect jobs, ensure safety, and foster growth. This is the way forward, dropping the manipulative rhetoric and embracing a strategy that values effectiveness over image. If the Democrats want to win, they must stop genuflecting to the latest trends and start addressing real issues head on. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.